So before you leave the room, maybe you take a minute. I have something to say. No, I don't need to say anything. So first of all, I'm really glad that I'm on the stage now because these chairs are so uncomfortable. And this is a good one. So this is for the organizers. The second thing I'd like to say, because Bruno was referring, thanks a lot to that paper in 1999, and I recommend you to read it. You see, because it's just 5 pages. In 1999, Nature, which is the leading interdisciplinary journal, so the editor-in-chief, Philip Campbell, asked me, we are publishing a series of so-called millennium essays, because it was the turn of the millennium. And we have a dozen of slots for people to summarize in a way, where do we stand in, say, particle physics, in chemistry. And I was asked to summarize where do we stand regarding the environment. And this is a unique opportunity, of course, so I thought a lot about these things, but I had done some work on sustainability, Earth system science before. So this paper came together, and it's easy reading, actually. So just a recommendation, maybe you go to the original to understand what I meant at that time. Actually, the paper, if I go back to it, is in a way prescient, really, more than I ever thought, because this S, the capital S, the subject, this was really meant as humanity turning into a sort of collective, intelligent organism and reflecting on its own agency, but on the planet and its interaction with the planet. And this was just a vision, so to speak, inspired in a way by another S. I mean, some of you may have read the mind-boggling essay or novel by Stanislav Lem, Solaris. So please raise your hand, who has ever read this? Oh yeah, a lot. And there is this wonderful movie done by Prophet Tarkovsky on that. And Solaris, in the end, turns out, this ocean turns out to be a collective, intelligent being, actually. So the idea was, on the course of evolution, isn't humanity moving towards a Solaris organism? Now, this was just science fiction, of course, 10 years ago, or 15 years, or 20 years ago. Today, we can probably make this a reality through big data, artificial intelligence, neural networks, and so on. So, digitalization, which is, apart from inequality and an environmental degradation, the third big challenge on this planet, can turn into a completely dystopian thing. You know, a few big companies owning everything, the algorithms, the data, controlling just everybody and becoming incredibly rich, and the rest of humanity is just sitting on the sidelines. But also it could be the other way around, that we use these modern means of communication, of simulation, and of new forms of intelligence for creating something like, now I use a German word first, Weltbewusstsein, a collective consciousness, where if we talk today about climate change, you may have seen in the news yesterday, there have been these devastating dust storms in India. So more than 100 people died. But you see it, just a flash in the pan. You see it for a few seconds on the TV screen. When you go to the next tragedy, and then there will be a 1-minute coverage of Stormy Daniels and the person he doesn't want to mention, Donald Trump. You see? Yeah. So, and the dust storms in India are just gone. Huh? But what about if we would have an immersive communication technology where you would be beamed into this village in Rajasthan immediately, and you would see children dying and so on. Huh? So it's terrible to even think about it, but couldn't we turn into something like a collective subject which feels the pain of the earth everywhere and the pain of our fellow human beings everywhere and in every instant? And I guess we would deal with nature, which you don't like as a terminology, or the environment, whatever. We would deal in a different way. So the global subject actually may come into being, and that is already mentioned in that essay. Now, I had a long discussion with Bruno before we met here on stage, and I read his terrestrial manifesto, however you call it. I think where do we land is much more appropriate, and I come to that in a minute. I read it. I gave a lecture yesterday at Oxford University, so I was a professor there for some time, which was completely different because you have 30 students in front of you in a dark room, no microphone, so it's completely different from here. Huh? It was interesting, and on the way back I read your manifesto, and what you don't answer at the end, and I would like to turn our discussion into that direction, is I think your analysis is fantastic. I share many of your insights, and I think you bring out a lot of very important insights, in particular about the denial of the climate crisis and so on. But what you don't do at the end is there any solution? Is there anything we can do about it? Or maybe I was not able to grasp it. So let me just classify the potential reactions to the climate crisis, or the soil crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the plastic crisis. I mean, all over the planet, yeah, you see this horrible development. So it's all a question about agency. It's all a question about who could turn this crisis into a solution. And you referred to the Titanic several times. I also come back to that. So the first answer, which is the standard political answer, is there is a problem, the climate problem, for example, and it can be solved, yes, but only in a piecemeal way. So you have to do many small steps. Yeah? This is, I would call, the Peter Altmaier approach. Yeah? It's not the Merkel approach, but this is a different thing. Maybe we can elaborate on that a little bit later. Now, what I heard from a CEO of Shell, you know, Shell is this tiny company selling, what is it, oil, I guess. So that was irony. So the CEO of Shell once told me, the climate problem is real, but it's completely intractable. You cannot solve it. So let's get rich quick before the world ends. No, and he was meaning that. So the third approach is, and this is horribile dictu, the man you don't want to name. Don't worry, be happy, there is no problem at all. So drill, baby, drill, whatever. And people love to hear that. There is no problem. Huh? And I think Donald Trump really believes that. So this is the most popular interpretation right now, all over the world, not only in the US. The more evidence we scientists we pile up, and the closer we approach the tipping points, the more are the people determined to ignore the problem. This is something that happened in history time and again, clearly. Now there is somebody in the world who says, yes, there is a problem, and it can be solved. His name is Xi Jinping. So, if you read the last 5 years plan of China, and I do know the people who write those 5-year plans, and if you will read the next one, you will see here's somebody who honors the problem, tries to analyze it in a rational way, based on engineering background and so on, and promises to solve the problem. And maybe China will change the game. Which leaves us with something which you, Bruno...
S is actually the name of a Chinese emperor?
Not necessarily. Let me come to that. Number 5. Because what Bruno also does in his book, and which I completely agree and love, is you ask the European question. Where is Europe in this game? Between Trump and Xi Jinping? Is Europe just a backwater continent which once tried to rule the world and now is more or less just a minor marketplace? And this is the real question. Is there a democratic and humanistic way to solve the problem we are facing? And I think, yes, it is. But our politicians, that is my observation over many years now, they have lost more or less the confidence that they can solve the problem in time. They have become powerless in a way. Those who we try to empower and give a mandate feel completely powerless. They know there's a problem, they cannot really solve it. So what they need is, and this is precisely the reversal of power to the people, it's power to the politicians. That means we, as a civil society, need to empower our politicians to create a wave on which they can serve towards a solution. So if there is a European way to address the problem, it is through civil society encouraging our institutions to do what they need to do. Because coming back to the Titanic now, and I've used this metaphor many times also, actually...
It used up, yeah.
Actually, I wrote the paper just before the Copenhagen Conference on Climate, which completely failed, which, with the title, Rearranging the Deck Chairs on the Titanic. And the problem now is not that you have a ship, it's facing an iceberg, and the captain is doing the wrong thing about it. So it's a wrong reaction, and it ends in a catastrophe. Today we have the situation, at least in Europe, that you're facing an iceberg, but nobody wants to be the captain. Nobody wants to take responsibility. Yeah? That is the real problem we're facing now. Okay, so much for now. And you can ask me anything you like to.
Well, one of the things is, of course, has to do with Earth system science. Earth system science, in your original idea, was actually connected with some of the idea around what I call Gaia. I mean, so I'd like to have some sort of your 20 years later reaction, because maybe I imagine a Gaia which has some characteristic which you disapprove of, or which is maybe I'm putting too much weight. But since you use the word Copernican Revolution, when one of the aspects of a Galilean discovery is not just a question of planet, I mean, which one turned around which one, the astronomical one, but it's the physics part, which is the notion of movement and the notion of folding body and the mathematization of the moving body. This is really where the revolution will occur, and then later with Newton. In my fanciful way, the notion of agent and not object is a crucial invention made by the Margulis, I mean, what I imagine is the Margulis Lovelock, but of course lots of other people have contributed to it, which then allows to rethink what it is to be an agent for political reasons. So since I would not have raised this question if in your own paper you had not mentioned Hobbes and the Leviathan, which is unusual in a scientific paper about physics of the Earth. And of course the connection is obvious because Hobbes is built on the Galilean object in order to invent the notion of a new political order. And this is where the situation has a parallel with what we are doing now. He needed a nature made of object in order to have a subject of a Leviathan contracting and having sovereignty being built. And this is, of course, the sovereignty of a nation state, which we now have to fight, because this is the thing that actually limiting the discussions about the Earth. So now, 300 years later, we are rethinking all these questions, but in a different order. So this is why I would like to know not only why you use Hobbes and Leviathan in this paper, but what was your sort of world view, if you want, when you invented the Earth system science? Because for me, it's a philosophy. It's a philosophical argument. I mean, your paper looked like a formal paper, but it's actually a philosophical statement that you made at the time. Yeah. Am I wrong on that?
No, it's a philosophical paper, but based on solid science, which is not self-evident, by the way.
Which is not what I do, you mean? Okay, go ahead.
Maybe with you, it's the other way around. No. Let me again say I really love what Bruno is doing. No, and I mean it, but of course, you know, it's a long journey until we write a paper of that type. That means you have maybe published 200 papers where you do deep drilling into peculiar problems. And this is providing you not with a feeling that you are a great guy and you are a very intelligent person, but it's rather that you feel humility because the problem is so big. And the more you learn about it, the bigger it becomes, really. So Earth system science is something we try to grasp now, but it's still far away from being a mature field. But we're on the way. And actually, let me reiterate, in that paper, I was talking about the ecosphere, if you like, so atmosphere and all together, including all Lovelock's ideas, plus the Anthroposphere. Mm-hmm. So the word Anthropocene was already there. Mm-hmm. And this brings me to Lovelock and Margulis. I mean, Jim Lovelock is a friend of mine. He now turned 98, and he's preparing his 100th birthday celebrations. So he's an amazing person. But I always had a fight with him on the interpretation of humanity within Gaia. So, you know, the Lovelock hypothesis is the biosphere, life on Earth, is creating its own conditions for survival. Of course, you have evolution and everything, but it's the co-evolution of the environment and life on Earth. So when you ask Jim Lovelock, where does humanity fit in? when he would say, or he did say to me, this is just a nasty perturbation of Gaia. But if you think through the approach, when we are part of this coevolution, and shouldn't we, like microbes or plants, react in order to stabilize their very life conditions, shouldn't we also do that? So in a way, at a higher level, including an intelligent perception of the world, we would be agents of Gaia, of course. And this is precisely something where the early Gaia people were very reluctant. The other thing is the Leviathan, which you mentioned, Thomas Hobbes or John Locke and so on. And this is really interesting because, Thomas Hobbes thought about, in order to overcome in medieval societies that everybody is fighting each other, right? And people kill themselves. You need somebody, you need a superior agency which is guaranteeing peace within a society. The difference is that there was a real institution for that, the monarch, the king, whoever, who was empowered by institutions and so on, to put an end to the fight between each other. Today we need also something like a global subject, but we don't have any institution for that.
Not big S.
The United Nations should do that. They run the climate convention. But you do not have any agency on this planet that can play the role of a modern Leviathan. That is our problem. So my vision would be that it has to come bottom up, actually, as a global movement of citizens to create their own institutions then. No?
But there is, as you know, a famous quote by, I see what you mean by the critique of a disinterest of, even sort of denial of the importance of the human by misanthropy, so to speak, of Lovelock. But there is also something that directly attack or complicate your expectation of the S being in charge when he has this famous quote which is expecting a human to be good steward of the earth is like expecting a goat to be a good gardener.
Precisely, yeah.
So, what after your experience, after 40 years of work in climate research, dealing with politicians and so on, what is your hope for this S subject to become a responsible steward? How much would you weigh on that expectation now? Because the other view from Sting and Harvey and the other line is to say, well, as I said, there's a Hamilton view. We need going back to a strong definition of a human in charge. Then there is the, let's say, Sting-Harvey line, which is we have to learn to live in the ruin without expecting an agent of history back in. We had too many of agents of history. Now we need to sort of deflate the expectation for a human in charge, because what we mean by human is usually a male government or strong man in charge or something like that. And then there is the view which you alluded to very briefly, but I'd like to know more about it, which is the sort of AI hope, the hope in an AI, Solaris connection.
Solaris, yeah.
And I want to understand if this is a cop-out or not. The idea that, at some point the AI will take charge, which is, by the way, also the topic of a new book by Lovelock, which is called Anthropocene, which is about AI taking over.
Everybody's writing about
so
that. Right
is this a cop-out, or have you really seriously hope for this S being replaced by a machine, basically, which is what it means, right?
Now, first of all, let me say again, although I studied this climate problem now for more than 20 years, I think the challenge of artificial intelligence, digitalization, is even bigger. The problem is it's much harder to understand. There are much fewer people who understand the problem and the algorithms and the technologies involved, and it's coming much more rapidly, actually. So if we are not succumbing to the climate crisis, we may just be replaced by whatever artificial organisms, intelligence, and so on. But we can turn it around, really. I think there's a very nice English way to say this. It's called punching above your weight. So punching above your weight.
Yes.
No,
that's
it
what
means
I do
if you are boxing and you are 70 kilos and you try to battle with somebody who is 120 kilograms, so a heavyweight, when this is an unpleasant encounter, as you can imagine. But I think what humanity does right now is punching below our weight. Because we'll talk about the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. I mean, let's not forget what powers, technologies, institutions, and so on, we have unleashed over the last 200 years.
So you mean we could solve it?
We absolutely can solve
Okay.
it. We have all the capacities to do it. I mean, the physics that helps us to dig out oil from the ground and to ship it over 10,000 of kilometers can, of course, make it possible that within 20 years we completely decarbonize the energy system. There are the roadmaps, it's all doable. The question is, and this is the vexing thing really, that we are not using our potency, not at all. And so it's the search for the subject, the political subject, which is the search of our time. Not that we cannot solve it. We can all live a fairly good life on this planet, even if human population turns 10 billion and so on. This can all be calculated. But we are not using our capacities at all. This would be creating a new Leviathan. And actually in the paper and in other places I have talked also about a new social contract. So this is referring to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the contrat social. So what you need is actually a new contrat social, which would empower this global subject to finally use all the methods we have and all the technical capacities. So yes, the problem can be solved. It could be solved the Chinese way. That is a possibility. I would love to solve it the European way.
I'm still struggling with your boxing metaphor. So I'm not in box at all. So it's not. It's like this. We could actually do it, and we don't do it because not because we are weak, but because we don't know our force.
Okay, let me educate you about boxing.
Yes, thank you.
Every day our politicians solve many, many problems, but they only solve the easy problems. The problems which do not challenge anybody. So today you don't want to do, if you want to be re-elected, your motto is don't harm anybody, which means in the future we will have to harm everybody. So we only solve the problems which are easy to solve. This is like boxing with somebody who is 20 kilograms your minor, of course.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Begin
You
together.
got it? Yeah? Okay.
With American, it's usually metaphors of sports are always escaping me. And I want to go back to the piecemeal way.
Okay.
Because, of course, there is one connection between the critique of the piecemeal way and the old sort of political imaginary which is associated with the notion of revolution. Of course, as you know, the word Copernican Revolution was introduced long after Copernic in the 19th century, in the 18th century, as a prelude, and then only then was used for political events. So it started as a term for scientific revolution and then only for political revolution. But of course, you also criticize the question of piecemeal decision, and the revolutionary aspect of that is quite important. And the other question is about art, because I mean, we are here in the HKV where lots of things were done about trying to make the link between the question of affect about the climate and the connection with art. Because the political affects associated with the question of climate are very limited in a way. I mean, it's a very small repertoire. And whatever we do with theater, with novels, with exhibitions, is increasing the amount, I mean, the harmonics, so to speak, of all these questions, so that they resonate in science, but they also resonate in art and throughout all the different mediums. I mean, and so I know that you are very interested in this question as well as an architect of buildings, and I'd like to know more about your view about that.
Okay, no, thanks. So the first one is about this revolution, and
were you a Maoist when you were young? I mean, are you from this generation of people?
Okay. I mean, judge for yourself. I was born in 1950, and I became an angry young man in 1968, so you can conclude for yourself.
Okay. Just checking.
But let me just... let me just read out, when we talk about revolutions, which is a citation here. You know, another person just turned 200. It's the, I think tomorrow's on, is the 200th birthday of Karl Marx. Are you aware of that? Huh? Karl Marx is that guy who talked about revolution, precisely. And let me just read out, and this is in German, unfortunately, but for the entertainment of the public here. So Marx says, der Kapitalismus hat massenhaftere und kolossalere Produktionskräfte geschaffen als alle vergangenen Generationen zusammen. Unterjochung der Naturkräfte, Maschinerie, Anwendung der Chemie auf Industrie und Ackerbau, Dampfschifffahrt, Eisenbahnen, elektrische Telegraphen, Urbarmachung ganzer Weltteile, Schiffbarmachung der Flüsse, ganze aus dem Boden gestampfte Bevölkerungen, welches frühere Jahrhundert ahnte, dass solche Produktionskräfte im Schoß der gesellschaftlichen Arbeit schlummerten. So he's jubilant about making nature a subject of human development, but he makes, of course, a major mistake. The productivity, which was created by the Industrial Revolution, was not driven by human ingenuity, it was driven by fossil fuels. Because when you were able to do things where you needed 1,000 times the energy a human being has. Now, coming back to this revolution and the piecemeal approach, of course we need disruptive change in order to still save the climate. And by the way, whether 2 degrees is a safe target, we don't know. You mentioned a few people like Will Steffen and others. We are just about, or we have just submitted a paper where we asked the question whether you can in a stable way, land. Where do we land? Land planet Earth at 2 degrees warming. It may be that there will be runaway processes. So even if we do everything in order to limit our emissions, it may be there is no safe parking space for the planet. So that is something. But if we want to bring that about, we need several disruptive changes. So I would not call them revolutionary. And for that, we need to focus on a few subjects only in the debate about climate change. So in Germany, I think we should focus everything on the phase out of coal. So this can be done. It's easy, actually. It will not cost much. It will save the German climate targets. And of course, there are thousands of other problems that need to be solved. But try everything to solve one important problem. So you have to create sharp objects which you use to cut through the social tissue, actually. Yeah? And this is something which many people, unfortunately, have failed to do, because they always try to come up with the complete solution. And the complete solution will never happen, or it will come very late, much too late. So focusing on a few things, create a few frontiers, or fronts actually, yeah, where I try to argue. So in France it would be different, of course. In France it would be probably how to solve agricultural problem, because French agriculture is just madness, sheer madness. It would not survive without heavy subsidies and so on. So getting across industrial agriculture would be the French front. Germany, it's the cold front. In the US, it's the mobility front, and so on and so on. So focusing on a few subjects and winning that battle is what we need to do.
Of course, throwing sharp objects.
Thank you so much for this applause.
Throwing sharp object into the social, as you say in France, is called a guillotine, but it doesn't matter much. What about art?
Yes. I mentioned that I was in Oxford yesterday, and in 2005, at the library of Christchurch College, we had a gathering of climate scientists and artists. And actually, these were the leading artists in the UK, Ian McEwan, Philip Pullman, and so on. And this was the start of what we called the tipping point. So the tipping point we used as a movement, bringing together the scientific and the artistic sort of agency, if you like. And it has been used all over the world. It has not changed the game. So in a way, it's true that we have tried almost everything in order to sort of propagate our insights. Now, let me also, because in the evening we had a dinner and talked about it, I was speaking at the German Society, and they had invited a number of prominent Germans before. One of them was Jürgen Grossmann. Do you know who that is? He was the former CEO of RWE, which is the biggest polluter in Europe. So big energy utility. Yeah? And so he gave a talk which was quite decent. But afterwards they took him to dinner, and after 10 whiskeys or so on, he really spoke his heart. And he said, all this climate science is complete nonsense. There is no climate problem. And he believes that. I'm absolutely sure this was not a lie. He deeply believes that. And this is our problem, really, that we are living in a state of self-created ignorance about the problems we don't like. So we fool ourselves as a collective human enterprise. Huh?
We are entering the third phase.
I hope I have cheered you up.
We have 10 minutes to 15 minutes for questions. Before we start the questions, I have really to apologize for the quality of the chairs. But it's just on the one side a temporary solution, and on the other side it's a very interesting experiment in the mind-body relationship. So we have the possibility for questions. There are mics. Here, there's a question here. Where are our mics? And there? We start here. I saw, yeah. I think we collect 3 questions and then we answer from here, and then we have a second round of 3 questions.
Hi, thank you for being here. My question is about, Bruno, when you were talking about how we live now in surfaces instead of on a globe and a global scale. And this has to do also with the counter-Copernican revolution. And my question is, I think something that is relevant to this discussion of new technology is the idea of space travel, which is no longer such a nationalist endeavor, but rather a capitalistic one. And my question is if you think that this is going to be an extension of our Copernican view, wherein we are members of a larger universe, or rather if we can maintain our living on surfaces while extending to other planets. Thank you.
Okay, second question. There's over there, just behind.
Yeah, I was really happy to hear that the Zod was mentioned in about 5 minutes of your lecture, so I give you applause for bringing something that's very pragmatic and landing somewhere on the Earth to rethink strategies. And I wanted to ask you if you think the Zod is something that combines an art project with something that is practical and technical for how we can do something that will be not quite like the techno-fascism of China or the US or the EU.
So that's for you.
Yeah, and the third question here.
Is that
What was it? Techno-fascism?
Techno-fascism of the US as a solution, not as a solution.
No, it was a different.
It's die Frau hier.
Sie sind der Moderator, Sie müssen ein Machtwort sprechen.
Okay.
So my question concerns the role of technology, because you were talking about new, finding new agents in this new regime, and we obviously have to think about technology. And is the role of technology the one of a mere extension of the body, or might we think of technology as being something more in this new symbiogenesis, when you will call it that?
Okay. No, we answer now and then have a second round. Bruno?
Which one do you want to take?
Yeah, I start. Space travel, things like that. No, it's an interesting question. Of course, I'm a physicist by training, and if you really calculate whether there is any possibility that we sort of colonize outer space, it's absolutely impossible. I mean, you can do sort of, actually Jim Lovelock thought about that, you can sort of terraform Mars or things like that. You could create an atmosphere there, but outside the solar system, the distances are simply too big. It's more interesting to really think, are we alone in the universe? I mean, we as a technical civilization. And if you do the calculation, I published some papers on that, actually in our galaxy alone, there are probably 20 billion Earth-like planets, 20 billion. So when we published the first paper on it, we had not discovered any of them outside the solar system. Now we know through the Kepler telescope and many other things, there are so many out there. So why don't they communicate with us? That's an interesting question. There is this so-called SETI project, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, but you don't hear anything, no signal, and so on. My personal assumption would be that there are about 100 technical civilizations in our galaxy alone, but space-time is so thin, actually, so immense that we will never be able to communicate with them. So rather than searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, I think we should search for terrestrial intelligence, but we have not found it. And I come to the technology later.
Go ahead. No,
Question number 3.
Go ahead.
Shall I go ahead? No, I mean, I don't know how many, does it work? Yes. Yeah. I don't know how many in this room really know about these technological frontiers we have in artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and so on. I mean, it is called human enhancement. And this could be an absolutely beneficial thing. People who are paralyzed could walk again, things like that. But where is the limit to that? Will we transform ourselves in this way? And in my view, the only way, like with climate change, where we have to reduce the emissions, the only way to come to grips with this explosion of agency and capacity is to have a deliberate deceleration of the use of digital technology, which is even harder than to save the climate. I think
acceleration or deceleration?
Deceleration. I think the pace is just much too fast. I think there are maybe 10,000 people who really work at the frontier right now. There's a complete disconnect between civil society and those who push the frontier in digitalization. It's unlike climate change, which is still a tangible phenomenon. So I think this is even more dangerous than climate change.
Well, on technology, I've studied technology for many years, and for me it's not a word which is different from the social organization itself. So I think, like John, I'm slightly suspicious of using technology as an isolated unit from the rest of the question. And it seems to me that there is indeed, I mean, the allusion to futurism and techno-fascism, so to speak, is a clear indication that there is, in my little diagram, a sort of hope associated with the post-human hopes, which I read as complete escapism, and which was for me characterized when Munch sent his rocket in space with one of his Tesla car in it. Because for people of my generation, I mean, we are about the same, space travel is something serious. I mean, it's not something you actually send publicity to. And so there's this sort of escapism of that. And in the same time, I mean, the same day, I was horrified by this escapist version. And when I saw the two first rockets coming back absolutely straight on the tarmac, I was impressed, immensely impressed by the quality of the technology. So talking about technology solves nothing, because we are constantly, again, selecting, is it going in the second, what I call the second attractor, or the third? So technology is another name for society. It's not a way out of society, and it has exactly the same problem, and there is a whole field of science and technology studies out of which I grew, so to speak. So technology is not the solution. It's another part of the problem.
Okay, we take a second round of questions. There's a question here. And there, yeah. Where is our mic? And here in front. Yeah.
In front.
It's a big room of ill-seated people.
But the body is still working. Well, let's start with here in front. Yeah.
Thank you for the conversation and the presentation so far. I have a question specifically for John Schellnhuber. You said you expect the solution to come bottom up from the people, or that would be the ideal. And on the other hand, you said there is this self-inflicted ignorance. So I see a fundamental tension between those two poles, and where do you see the solution between those?
Okay. We take over there. Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. When we discuss about human agents and agency, we always understand agency as a human attribute and fairly understand it very objectively without understanding how agency is modulated by so many aspects around us, material and immaterial, climate, climate being a manifestation of our own actions in that sense over a period of time. So I would like to bring up here a practical concern, for instance. So you talked about dust storms in India that just arrived, and there are always these catastrophical events that come and go, like tornadoes in America. And at the same time, politicians, people who hold power, and people, representative people, who people like us have given power to make decisions for us, go and make statements like there is no climate change, and they truly believe in it. True. So I kind of like come from this human understanding of things, of us being born into a system in a zeitgeist at a certain point of time with its own conditions, and now being born in 2018 here with climate conditions rapidly snowballing beyond control of individual agency, my individual agency. Even when I go out, I'm an educationist, I go to my country, Delhi, that's the almost always competing with China of which is the most polluted city. And there you go, you see these young people growing up out of context, out of with a very temporary context of surfaces that we were talking about. If we cross the concepts of space and time, we only see what there is in that time and space. And so what I actually wanted to ask you is about the concept of agency, and two aspects of agency for the individual. First is agency as an individual power. For instance, me, that I can make an impact. Whatever small it is, I can. And the other aspect of it is effective agency, maybe. I don't know if that term exists, but how much agency do you feel you have? When many times when there are things happen.
We have to come to close. I think
So that's
the question, no, really, the question became clear.
That's my question, is how we as as theorists about science and human behavior and sociology, how do we bring this to people about this consciousness aspect of agency, of what power we have and how it is manipulated? So that's my question.
Thank you. We take a last question. Please be short.
It's a very short question, and thank you. It's a structural question, and it's to all three of you. Do you think we can solve those challenges without you bringing feminine voices to your table?
Here are only 3 men and no feminists.
Oh yeah, I was asking.
Okay.
Okay. Actually, I can answer
Not the third one, though.
I want to answer the third one, actually, because I suggested to the organizers that there should be a woman on this panel, Patricia Nantz, who is sitting here and is with the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies. But you see, she was brainwashed for many centuries to just accept human domination by men, so she didn't show up. That was a joke.
A bad joke.
A bad joke, I know. I'm famous for bad jokes. Now, but let me answer from my point of view, and I think Bruno should have the last word here. I mean, try to bring the two questions together in a way. I mean, agency. So India, I will actually see Modi in September, your prime minister, who was once governor of Gujarat and boosted solar energy. So he's doing some good things, and he's doing some bad things, as you know, better than I do. So let's see what will happen. But I think also this seeming contradiction between self-inflicted ignorance and on the other hand, something like a civil movement. I think in a way everything is possible now. When you think of France 2 years ago, so it seemed that the public debate was just dead. Dead in the water, really. And when you had this Macron thing, La France, la République en marche, and whatever will come of it, I mean, it was igniting passion, movement, and so on. I think there are 3 ingredients you need to solve the climate problem and many other things the European way. The first is, and Bruno is emphasizing this in his terrestrial manifesto, is it's not so much about facts, we have all the facts. It's about stories, it's about narratives. So you need a good story, really, a good story for the human enterprise in the 21st century. And it's fairly easy to put that together, because we know what is making us happy and what is making us sad. The second is a movement, yes, and a movement which is probably beyond all the boundaries of the incumbent parties. And nobody really trusts the parties as they exist today. That is precisely why a maverick like Trump gets so many votes. Not because he's such a fantastic politician, just because people are worn out with the old system. So you need a movement beyond that. And actually, I think who are the only ones who can break up with self-inflicted ignorance and get us out of our comfort zone? Yeah, the only people, and Bruno referred to it, are young people, clearly. Because when you are 18 years old or 21, I mean, you don't care whether you are a nuisance or an embarrassment. And you're willing to sacrifice everything for what you think is right. So, a story, a movement, and driven by young people, and then the entire political establishment will have to follow. So get up from your easy chair.
Bruno? Agency?
On agency, I think this is a misunderstanding. Probably I went too fast. Agency is not a property of humans. Agency in my work and the work of science studies is a property of what acts. And so it has nothing to do with the consciousness of being an agent. It's a property of microbes and stones and rocks and fungi, and precisely the sort of way to escape the notion of objects sitting side by side, which is part of a universe as had been described by the first Copernican Revolution. This is why I make the contrast between the de-animated version of object, which is what Husserl called Galilean object, and Lovelockian, if you accept the term, agents. And a word made of the two set of entity does not react to political intervention in the same way. So this was a very general philosophical point I was making about agency. And the second point about the question is, I think it's very important to remember that Gaia is a feminine figure. So the whole immense work which has been produced by people like Haraway and so on, and Stengers and many others, is precisely in resonance with this very, very important mythical aspect of Gaia. And I like Gaia precisely because it's a mythical and a scientific entity. We should never forget it's a feminine figure. And the other thing is that Lynn Margulis called Gaia a bitch, which is a very important figure. I mean, this is a famous paper by Lynn Margulis. Don't forget that Gaia is a bitch. So it's a feminine figure. It's not a motherly, nice, green type of figure. It's a tough one.
Yeah, perhaps a final statement from my side as far as the women part is concerned. On the one side, it's always good to have women on stage. Number two, what I would ask you to look at is to look at our work in continuation. And we just had Anat Singh here, and we're going to have Predotti here in the next big lecture. So not just looking at one event and look what we are doing in its complexity.
So lots of other occasions of being seated on these
Yes,
chairs.
exactly. There are a lot of other body experiments to come. I can assure you that end of June we have the old situation again, and you may...
You mean new chairs?
New chairs.
Ah.
No, this is just a
We come back.
temporary one. And we may do the experiment with the other chairs. Maybe we have a completely different evening.
Okay.
No, thank you very much for coming, and especially the thanks are going to Bruno Latour and Joachim Schellnhuber for their presentations.
Wow.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah.